substantially larger crowd than we had last year for this event, which we held in the library. So it's lovely to see so many people have come out on a night like tonight, which was a bit drizzly out there when I got in. I haven't been out for a little while, but it's good to see so many people coming out in this Men's Health Week. My name is Steve Martin. I am the breakfast presenter at ABC Ballarat, and this is a very late night for me this evening, but I think tonight will be worthwhile. It'll be worth the effort for you all to come out. I've got a bit of housekeeping to do before I introduce our keynote speaker, who is Ron Iddles, and I think we're all looking forward to hearing from Ron, judging by the interest over with the table with the books and the fact that so many of you have turned out. First up, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this event's taking place. It's the Wathaurong people, and pay my respect to their elders past and present. A couple of bits and pieces to go through this evening. I need to let you know that tonight is being video and audio recorded, and it will be available for people to view online at a later date. So if you don't wish to have your photo taken, and if you don't wish to be on video, if you could quietly let the photographers know, that would be appreciated this evening, because as I say, this will be published and available online for other people to take part, have a listen, and experience what we're going to be experiencing tonight. I also need to thank the partners and sponsors for tonight, and I tried to memorise them, but there's quite a list, so I haven't been able to do that. But tonight, as a community night and as a free event, wouldn't happen without those partners. It wouldn't happen without some of the sponsors as well. And they include Ballarat Health Services, who are involved. Ballarat Libraries are also involved, and traditionally over the last, I think it's 6 years, they have run this night. And as I say, tonight is a much bigger event. The Ballarat Community Health is involved. Western Victorian Primary Health Network, UFS Dispensaries are involved. The Bendigo Bank, Bupa are also involved tonight. AFL Goldfields, Ballarat Urology, Central Highlands Water, the Prostate Cancer Support Group, APM Employment Services, Ballarat Health Services Social Club, Central Highlands Primary Care Partnership, and Sons of the West from the Western Bulldogs are all involved as event sponsors this evening. So we thank them for being involved and allowing us to put on an event such as this. I won't take up any more of your time. I'm just going to introduce Ron Iddles. And again, I thought I'll have a look online, I'll check a bit of Ron's history. I think many of us know the name Ron Iddles from seeing him on the news, hear him talk in his various roles over the years. But I didn't quite realise some of his history as I was looking him up, and I thought I'll come up with a couple of bits and pieces and I'll wing it. I couldn't do that, I had to write it down because he's had a very long and a very distinguished career. Now, he is our keynote speaker for tonight. He entered the Victorian Police in 1972, is when his career dates back to. It was in the uniform branch. He was working in and around Collingwood. He was later transferred to Fitzroy, to the CIB, the Criminal Investigation Branch. He became a homicide detective about 8 years later in 1980, and at one point he also worked with the National Crime Authority. He was seconded to that organisation. Interestingly, I didn't realise this, but apparently he retired from the police force in 1989, but about 5 years later he decided to return and he went back as a constable. And I'm sure Ron will tell you later if I've got any of this wrong. But he worked his way back through the ranks to within a few years being a detective senior sergeant with Victoria Police once again. 2012, he was in charge of the Cold Case Homicide Division. He left Homicide in 2014, and from there he became Secretary of the Police Union. And that's probably where I've had a bit to do with Ron Iddles in my work when I've been interviewing various members of different unions and organisations as issues come up. And I've spoken with Ron, I'm not sure if he remembers, but I've spoken with him, not that often really, maybe half a dozen times over the couple of years that he was in the police union as the secretary. While in that role, he was also instrumental in raising men's mental health, which is one of the things we'll be talking about here this evening. In his 37-year career, some of the figures that I could find indicate that Ron Iddles investigated over 300 murder cases and hundreds of other cases involving suspicious deaths. His conviction rate was 99%, and he's been dubbed as Australia's greatest detective. His book is, of course, The Good Cop, which is over there, and I've been watching with interest as people have been going over to look at that. There's also a spin-off 6-part series of The Good Cop on Foxtel, and from what I could see as well, there's a podcast related back to the book. So I'd like to introduce, if you'd give a very warm welcome to our guest speaker for tonight, Ron Iddles.
Thank you for having me here tonight to speak to you. 2 years ago I retired and I spoke at a function at Moonee Valley, and I said, that is it, that's the last time I'll speak at a public function. And then people started to ring me up, and I've probably done 15 nights all around charity events, so I'm very happy to be here. It's a little bit cool. I now live up at Trinity Beach. I'll be back there Saturday near Palm Cove. It'll be 27. I'll have the shorts and thongs on. Tonight I'll take you on a bit of a journey. I want to take you on 25 years of homicide experience. I'll talk to you around mental health issues, some of the issues that I faced whilst in Victoria Police, some of the initiatives that we brought in at the Police Association. I will say, when I first went to the Police Association and I made some public comment around mental health and how it was affecting police officers, I got a phone call from the Chief Commissioner to say I shouldn't speak about it. At least we've now moved on, and as of the 1st of July this year, emergency services workers, ambulance, fire and police will get what we call presumptive legislation. So if you put your hand up and say you're suffering from a psychological injury, you'll get 13 weeks treatment regardless of whether it's attributed to your work or not. So I think we're moving forward. I had 42 years in Victoria Police, and people say to me the world changed on September 11th when 2 planes went into Twin Towers. I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a doctor, but I've been dealing with human behaviour as a police officer since 1973. I think we've been changing for a long time. We've lost the art of communication. We don't want to speak face-to-face anymore. We want to send a text message. We want to use Twitter. We want to use Facebook. We want to send an email. We're now caught up in the fastest-paced world that we've ever seen. The world is in our backyard, and that's what modern media has done. As I looked around the room tonight, I saw several people standing and talking, but I also saw this. We've become addicted to our phones. We don't want to talk. My daughter says to me, who's 43, she says, my kids are never off the phone. I say, have a look at yourself, Joanne. You're on it, right? That's where they learn it. In America now, there are clinics around detoxifying or getting you to give up the habit of your phone. As I say, we're caught up in the fastest-paced world that we've ever seen. 1 in 5 of us, the current statistics, will suffer from depression or anxiety. We've got 400 people here tonight, and there are people who are suffering. If you've got a broken arm, what do? You go to the doctor. If you have a psychological issue, whether it be stress, anxiety, depression, especially men, we don't want to talk about it. You've got to start to talk about it. You've got to engage with each other. We have the highest suicide rate in the Western world. There's 400 people here tonight. In 6.5 weeks, have a look around, in 6.5 weeks, everybody in this room will be dead. Because that's the current suicide rate. 3,220 a year. 2,300 men. There are 6 men a year, 6 men a day who take their lives. Of those 6, they affect another 120 people. Drugs are rampant in our society. Self-help groups are rampant in our society. As a society, you're searching for something. We've got to put the handbrake on and we've got to slow down. Got to start to talk and we've got to start to engage with each other. I don't want you sitting around the piano every Sunday night having a roast and holding hands and singing Kumbaya, but I do want you to start to think. What's that got to do with homicides? Well, homicides, people say to me, what's a murderer look like? He looks like you or I. Many of the issues around homicide are around drugs, are around family violence, they're around depression, they're around mental illness. The recent murder in Royal Park, and I'm going to be very careful about what I say or it'll be front page of the paper. There were some comments made around the fact that it was men's behaviour. Yes, it was a man who was the offender, but both of those, the girl who was murdered, had slipped through the crack. So had the offender. The issue in that case is mental health. We've got more people now suffering mental illness than we ever have. Why? Is it because we don't talk? You and I have helped create the world in which we live in, and it's time we actually slowed down. At the Homicide Squad, you're charged with the responsibility to investigate every death in the state. That might turn out to be an accident, might turn out to be natural causes, or it might turn out to be a suicide, or it might turn out to be a homicide, which is murder or manslaughter. People go to great lengths to commit suicide. A guy walks out of his factory one Friday night out in Campbellfield, and his name's Raj, and he says to his best mate, do you know what I'm going to do tomorrow on Saturday? I'm going to buy a handgun, I'm going to shoot my 3 children, and then I'm going to shoot myself. What does his best mate say? He doesn't say anything. The following day, we get a call and we go out there. 3-year-old, 5-year-old, 7-year-old shot with a shotgun, and Raj had shot himself. I talked to his partner, Reema, they've been together for 6 months. And she said, we went out last night and we walked down the beach at Port Melbourne. We walked hand in hand along the beach and he said to me, babe, I want you to remember one thing. This is our last night together. If anything happens to me, I want you to remember this place. The following morning, when they got up, she went off to Preston Market. He said, you don't need any food this week. When she came home, he shot the 3 kids and himself. The first person to ring me was his mate. And his mate said to me, I didn't believe him. Should have asked him one question, maybe 2. Is there anything that I can do for you? Are you all right? Maybe he would have told him and said, yeah, I'm struggling. When people are thinking about suicide, and this is where men, we don't ask the question or we don't want to be involved. And I've been to many, many suicides in my career. The signs are always there. If I go to a suicide and you start to talk to people, the signs are always there. It will be something that's said or something that they've done. Those who suicide with a knife will always have a tentative cut. If you're talking to someone who you think is struggling, ask the question, are you suicidal? Do you have a plan? Because if someone has a plan, they are the ones who are more likely to take their life. And then if you can reach out and get some help. Darcy Freeman was a little girl thrown off the top of the Westgate Bridge. There is no doubt that people knew that the father was spiralling out of control. He was ringing people and telling them that he was struggling. He told people that if the family law court came back, and made a decision which meant that he didn't see his children as often. He was contemplating doing something. The morning that he left Geelong, he had his children with him and he rang his wife. He said, I want to tell you something, you're never going to see your children again. See, I think what he was going to do was throw them all over the top of the bridge and do it himself. But a lady intervened and he was ultimately arrested. How do we cope as investigators when we have to go to those situations? My children are grown up, but I have grandchildren, but I worked with some guys who had children the same age as the little girl thrown off the bridge. So I said, well, you don't go to the post-mortem, I'll go to the post-mortem. Then two of them come to me and said, we've been invited to go to a private funeral at Wattle Park with the family. I said, well, go. And they went and they came back and they said, we were given a box of butterflies. And we let the butterflies go and we bawled our eyes out. See, homicide investigators aren't any different to any other human being. Ambulances officers see things that are tragic, road accidents, bodies cut up. It's about actually how you deal with it. You've got to talk about it, but for those guys, just going to the funeral and letting the butterflies was enough for them to refocus on what they were about. As I said, people go to great lengths to commit suicide. And our role as an investigator is to determine whether it's a suicide or it's not a suicide. We have cases where we get what we call a murder-suicide, where someone kills those, normally their loved ones, and then take their own life. So we go to a house in Frankston one Sunday night, and there's a lady, there's an 18-year-old boy, his name is Rodney. He's lying in bed, he's been bashed with a hammer. The mother and father aren't present at the house, but we make some inquiries and we find out that Rodney went to the police station at Frankston at 4 o'clock on the Sunday morning. He said, I've got home, my dad is asleep in bed, but my mum is not there and I'm worried about her. So they said, well, your mum's 56, come back Sunday afternoon if she hasn't been found, and what we'll do is we'll then report her missing. Little did he know his dad was waiting for him to come home. So there's a cassette player, and in the cassette player is Alan Scott, and he talks about what he's going to do. And it gives you an insight as to how sometimes these people think. He says, my name's Alan. It's 7 o'clock at night. I just want to tell you that I killed Joyce at 5 o'clock. I've stabbed her to death. You don't need to go out and do a post-mortem. She's buried in the backyard. I'm waiting for my son to come home now, and I intend to kill him exactly the same way. You people in the media, you people who know me, don't make a judgment because I know what I'm doing. I've gone over this 100 times over 100, and I know exactly what I'm doing. See, I'm doing it out of love. Because I know that Rodney won't cope without his mother. I intend to kill myself. I'm going to gas myself in the oven, or I'll hang myself in a tree. But he didn't. He went and drowned himself. I am doing this out of love because I know that once both of us are gone, Rodney won't cope and he'll want to kill himself, but he'll make a botch of it. So don't make a judgment. I've gone over this 100 times over 100. I know exactly what I'm doing. He's lost touch with reality. So many people who are involved in homicide sometimes lose touch with reality. They have depression. They have anxiety. Alan Scott suffered depression probably for 15 years. There is always a trigger, and what I say is we all have a baseline. Sometimes we're up there, sometimes we're down there, but most of the times we track along. You go to the doctor and you say, I'm struggling, and he might give you some medication. There's nothing wrong with medication for your head. We go and get our arm bandaged, but we don't want to take a tablet that fixes our brain. Alan Scott should have been on medication, but he got a bad work rating from his boss. And from that point on, he thought he couldn't cope or couldn't look after his family properly. He was going to be out of work. So his solution is, the only solution is, I have to kill everyone, all the problems are gone. If you're talking to people, and there'll be people in here tonight who are suffering. When I spoke at a function in Kyabram 6 weeks ago with John Sylvester Sly, the Underworld, we did a charity thing. We raised $40 for the Kyabram Hospital. There was a couple of hundred guys there. It was a business luncheon. At the end, a guy came up and he said, "You know what? I'm struggling." I said, "What have you done about it?" He said, "Nothing." He told me a story and I said, "I think," and I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, but I think you got post-traumatic stress. 2 days later, I rang him and I said, "What I want you to do is to go to a doctor, get yourself on a mental health plan, and you get 10 free sessions." He said, "Ron, I'm in the doctor's surgery now." So don't be ashamed tonight if you're actually struggling. Reach out to someone, reach out to your medical practitioner, reach out to your friend. You might say to me, "What's all this got to do with homicides?" Well, it's got a lot, because some of those things feed into homicides, those who actually commit homicide. Most people who commit a murder aren't bad people. I say they make poor choices. They might be drug affected. They might be alcohol affected. They might have some mental illness. Or they might just do it because their emotions outrun their intelligence. People say to me, "Why were you successful?" Well, I had a good team, always had a good team. But I got to the stage of understanding something around human behaviour. People want to feel needed. There's two things that you can give people. There's two things that I can give a crook. The ability to listen and the ability to understand. So if I'm interviewing someone, tell me about what happened. Explain to me. And at times you can be genuine in your empathetic. You don't become sympathetic or your judgment's clouded, but it's about showing empathy. Listening costs you nothing. Understanding costs you nothing. And as a society, we have to get back to the stage where we start to talk to each other rather than text messages. My best mate, who I work with, left Victoria Police and he went to work with Australia Post. And I saw him about 4 weeks before he committed suicide. And we had a conversation. He appeared to be travelling all right. Then I spoke to a friend of his and he said, "Oh, Bob's not travelling well. He's got to sack some people." I said, "Oh, you've been talking to him?" He says, "No, we've just been emailing each other or texting each other." Well, sometimes you've got to do a bit more than that. He couldn't pick up face-to-face. If you text message or you email, you don't pick up that face-to-face. And when Bob finally realised he needed help and he said, "I'll get help," that was a Saturday morning. He then hung himself in the garage in the afternoon. So guys and women, but we know that the suicide rate for men is the highest in the Western world. The biggest cause of death in men is suicide. The second largest cause is bowel cancer. Why? Because we don't go to the doctor and we don't get checked. But all those things go into a big melting pot. Drugs, alcohol, depression, mental illness, motives for murder, greed, lust, and what comes out like a big funnel is what we deal with at the homicide. So it's either an accident, it's either suicide, it could be a murder-suicide, or otherwise it's a homicide. And if it's a homicide, it's either murder or manslaughter. People say, "Oh, for a murder, you must prove premeditation. It must be something that's done over 2 or 3 weeks. Well, it's not. It's pretty simple. The accused person must do an act, and at the time he does that act, he's got to intend to kill or intend to do real serious injury and death results. That's it. So we had a rule in the office. If it's a firearm, you can only either intend to kill or do real serious injury. Multiple stab wounds, you can only intend to kill or do real serious injury. When you get down to 1 or 2 punches, you're never going to have a murder. You'll only have a manslaughter. You've got to prove that they intended to do the act. I've interviewed over 300 people in relation to homicides, and I've only ever had one tell me that I intended to kill. Human nature being what it is, we always want to minimise our involvement. I used to ask a question, when you stabbed him, what did you intend to do? Stupid question, because the answer's always going to be, I didn't intend to kill him. So the question was, what did you think would happen when you stabbed him? Oh, well, I thought I'd seriously injure him. You've got him then for a murder. I go to a house in Rosebud where a young lady's been shot in the head. We talk to the landlord and he says she's been living there with a guy and his name's Les. I heard an argument, then I heard a gunshot. Les turned out to come from a famous family of painters and dockers. He had 2 other brothers who were involved in the underworld killings. Anyway, we make some inquiries and we go to the dead girl's mother's place and she says, oh, my daughter was here tonight with Les and they left at about 11 o'clock. Les was walking around the lounge room with a revolver spinning the chambers and he was saying, I'm walking on a thin line. I feel like I could kill someone tonight. Anyway, 5 days later, we found Les. And he said, no, I didn't intend to kill her. It was an accident. He said, we got into bed. I took 5 bullets out of the chamber and I spun the chamber. I put it to her head. I pulled the trigger. It didn't go off. Second time I did it, she did it to me. It didn't go off. Ron, you won't believe it. The next time I did it to her, it went off. Les, what did you think would happen? I don't know. Well, it doesn't matter what he says. If you put a gun to someone's head and you pull the trigger, you either intend to kill or intend to do real serious injury. So that's really what murder is. You have to prove that at the time they do the act, they intend to kill or intend to do serious injury and death results. Manslaughter is really an unlawful act dangerous to life. So the law changed recently where you used to have, when we had 1 punch, you would never get a manslaughter. Now we have what we call 1 punch manslaughter. So it's just unlawful act dangerous to life. What do you actually need to prove in a homicide? You've got to prove or you've got to show the identity of the deceased. If you don't know who the deceased is, you can't start your inquiry. You've got to know what the cause of death is because you've got to show that the accused person caused the death. And you've got to have a motive. If you have those 3 things, identity, cause of death, motive, most times you're going to solve the case. You should be going in some direction within 48 hours. Jane Thurgood Dove was murdered on Oaks Day 1997 in the driveway of her home in Thornbury. I knew who she was. I know what the cause of death is. It's a gunshot to her head. But I didn't know the motive. And I remember saying to my boss says, how do you think you're going to go? I said, we're going to be there for the long haul. 13 and a half years later, there's no doubt it's a case of mistaken identity. The guys who were involved got the wrong house. She was 3 houses from the corner of Hoffman's Road, and the person who was meant for lived 3 houses from another street, but in the same street of Muriel Street. They both drove 4-wheel drives. So you must have identity. You must have cause of death, and you've got to show that the accused person caused the death. I've done some jobs here in Sunshine where a gentleman had an exhaust factory and a young bloke comes in and he buys a set of exhausts and some extractors. They have an argument because they don't fit and he knocks him to the ground, and eventually the owner is taken to hospital and he dies. Did the assault kill him? You go to a post-mortem, he didn't know, but he had heart blockage 98%. You're never ever going to have a homicide because the main contributing factor to his death is his heart disease. Yes, the stress might have brought it on, but you're never going to get there. So identity, cause of death, and a motive. If you find a body in the bush or you find a body somewhere, until you identify it, you can't start. 98% of murders are committed by someone known to the victim. 55%, there's a direct correlation. It's either a family member or some very close associate. Very rarely are you going to be killed by someone that has absolutely no connection. So we went to a factory area in Pakenham where a young 18-year-old was found burnt in a big brick bunker. Well, until we identify him, you can't start. Luck happened, his fingers were up under his armpit and he'd been in trouble and we were able to identify him. Then you work out a timeline and say, okay, where does he live? Who does he associate with? So we go to the house in Pakenham where he lived. Knock on the door, Trevor comes out and says, come in, and we go in and there's a large square of carpet missing from the lounge room. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to look there and think, aha, it's happened here. Trevor says, I'm going to tell you what happened. I've been living with this other guy and he gave the young 18-year-old $20 to go and get some smoking dope. He went off and he came back late at night at about 9 o'clock at night. He didn't have the $20 and he didn't have the smoking dope, so my mate pulled out a gun and shot him. So we wrapped him up in the carpet and we took him out to the factory area and cut his stomach open, filled it up with petrol, and they're not brain surgeons, but they then wanted to have a smoke, and they blew themselves out of the brick building and burnt their eyebrows. So what we were looking for was a man with burnt eyebrows, and we found him. And he turned out to be the guy that went on to kill Carl Williams. But you've got to have identity, you've got to have a cause of death, and you've got to show that the accused caused the death, and you've also got to have a motive. If you have those three things, most of the time you're going to solve the job. So if we go to a crime scene, the crime scene is where the crimes happen. I want to go to that crime scene with not a preconceived idea. I want to go in there and I want to let that scene talk to me. I want to put myself into the mind of the offender and the skin of the victim, and we want to be able to work out what's happened there. You might remember the case of Laurel Macon, a real estate agent at Melton. She went to show someone a vacant house and she never came back. When we went to that house later on in the night when she was found, it's about trying to recreate what happened there. And I remember going up the stairs and I see blood droplets, and you can sort of visualise a struggle on the stairs. She's naked, she's had her hands tied, she's been raped, and she's in the bath. Very, very horrific death. Is this somebody who's just walking by? As I say, there has to be 98% of times a connection. In her diary, she had a note going to show someone the house but didn't have a name. The local police say to us, we're pretty confident we know who it is. His name's Gary and he lives in the town and he's fascinated with real estate agents. What he does is he'll go and steal a sign and he'll put it outside your house. He collects real estate agents' card. He's got a prior conviction for rape. Aha, we got him. 4 o'clock in the morning, we're going through the front door of his house. We miss him, he's gone out the back and we lost him. On the bench is the leader newspaper, open up to elders, real estate, and a circle around Laurel Macon. This is good stuff. Or is it a coincidence? Yes, you have to speculate to accumulate. But whilst we eventually arrested him for stealing a push bike and he's back at the police station and he says, Ron, I'm telling you, I didn't do it. Well, it looks like it's going to be a long day, Gary. I get a phone call from a lady in Perth. She said, my ex-boyfriend rang me and he said, I think I've killed a real estate agent, which was before the body was found. Anyway, he was a Chinese national. We shot around to his house. He'd already packed. And I took a punt and I rang his phone and he answered and he was at the airport. So eventually he didn't get on a plane, and later that day we finally arrested him. On his computer he had a video which he downloaded which was how to rape a woman. And it was raping a woman over a bath. But the learned judge said, no, I'm not allowing that in evidence. It's too prejudicial, because the age of the woman is different. See, sometimes the law is an arse or an ass, right? But you've got to have those things. You've got to let that scene talk to you. At every crime scene, there is something left behind. You've come in here tonight, you're going to leave something here. Might be your footprint. Might be a fingerprint. It might be your DNA. You might take a fibre from the carpet. So when we go to a scene, what we're looking for, and we call it the principle of exchange, something that's foreign to the scene that might belong to the accused person, so that ultimately later on you can compare it. I go to a house in Altona where two elderly people, their names are Russos, that have been murdered. They're very strict, and they're very strict on security. No forced entry. Mr. Russo has been sitting in his chair watching television. The weapon is a walking stick. It's a weapon of opportunity. It's his own walking stick. He's been kicked and had all his ribs broken. Mrs. Russo is outside the house because she's got two kitchens where she does the cooking outside. This is not a burglar. This has to be someone who knows them. Has to be someone that I think speaks Italian, because they don't speak any other language. There's no forced entry. Mrs. Russo has got severe injuries to her face. She's then had a tea towel put over her head. When you have injuries to your face and the face is covered, you're talking direct family member or someone very close. And there's books written about it, because what happens is the person responsible can't bear to see what they've done. The house is ransacked. 3 bedrooms. Their son Joe has a bedroom there, but he doesn't live there. His bedroom's not touched. $35,000 in the drawer of Mrs. Russo's bedroom. It's not a robbery. This has to be someone who knows. Who finds the body? Their son. He says, I've been ringing them all afternoon. No answer. Hang on, Joe, you only lived around the corner. Why didn't you go and have a look? Oh, no, I just kept ringing. Coppers, we're not profilers. We work off our gut instinct, and I said to the guys, there is no doubt that Joe is responsible for this. 3.5 years later, we eventually charged him. He's now doing 35 years. But it's about going to those scenes and allowing those scenes to actually talk to you. Don't go there with a preconceived idea. You know, sometimes we've actually gone wrong in investigations because the focus becomes on one particular person. If you take on a cold case, it's not about being critical of the original investigation. It's about looking at it with a new set of eyes. Elizabeth Memory went missing in 1994, and for the first 10 years, the original investigators thought it was a guy called Robert. I was given the task to re-look at it And I came to the conclusion, well, Robert's never actually been interviewed by the police in 10 years. Might go out and see him. He might say, you know what, Ron, I did it. But he didn't, he denied it, and eventually I proved he couldn't have done it. There was another suspect who we proved couldn't have done it. So when we got to do Jill Maher, because where they went wrong in that investigation of Elizabeth's memory, the focus was on one person. So you get all this information from the public, but you've got to look at it all. So you need to break your crew down or your team of detectives down. So with all the information that came in around Elizabeth's memory, the person who I ultimately charged was spoken to in the first 5 days. But he was discarded because the focus was on one person. So when Jill Maher went missing, I made sure that we split it up. Sure, Tom's going to be a suspect, the husband. But it's about making sure, let's look at Tom, but not to the detriment of everything else. And in the end, we could prove it can't be Tom because Tom's walking down the street, he's on video at 4 o'clock in the morning when her phone's going down the Tullamarine Freeway. So as I say, most people that we deal with, they're not that bad. They're just like you or I, or they're suffering from some issue. Another case down in Rosebud where a lady was raped and bashed in a house. And we walk along and we door knock and we talk to people along the street. Did you see anything? You see a lot of police say, I want to know, did you see anything suspicious? It's a bad question, right? Because the offender might be your next door neighbour and you saw him in the street, but you don't see that as suspicious. So the question is, during this time, what did you see? Now, many people in that street in Rosebud said there's a young guy who wears an overcoat, don't think he showers much. Do you know his name? Oh, no, I wouldn't talk to him. They make a judgment about him. As it turned out, he was the person responsible. When we interviewed him, he says, you know what, Ron? I'm lonely. I'm depressed. No one talks to me because they think I'm dirty. Only one lady was prepared to talk to me, who was an alcoholic, but they had both become, in the end, alcoholics and had an argument, but he killed the person who actually cared for him. But people in the street had already made a judgment about him. All I'm saying is, what's wrong with saying, how are you going, mate? 2 young boys died at a house in Mooroopna a few years ago, and straight away, even the media says the mother has killed those boys. I say ABC, assume nothing, believe nothing, check everything. The detectives that went up said that they were pink. What's that tell you? Carbon monoxide. But everyone in the town had that woman crucified. But the end result is the boys died of carbon monoxide poisoning. So where do you people come in? Maybe one day you're going to sit on a jury. People say to me, how come that person walked out of court for a serious offence? Because you in the community let him out. See, in a trial, it's the jury that makes the decision. The judge is only there to determine facts of law. He can give the jury advice, but it's the jury who determine the facts. So you're now all on the jury, and this is a real case. And I might ask you to tell me whether he's guilty or not guilty. It's 11 o'clock at night, it's a house in Berwick, Yards are sitting in the lounge room with her new boyfriend Rod. Cassandra's 13, she's in her bedroom, she hears a noise. She gets up and she goes into the lounge room, she says, Mum, I've heard a noise outside. As she goes back to her bedroom, she sees that a man has come in through the back door. His name's Jonathan. He's a family friend. He didn't know that Yards had a new boyfriend. She goes back into the lounge room and she says to her mum and to Rod, don't worry, it's only a family friend. She sees Rod goes to his car, which is 50 metres from the house. It's a ute, and he pulls something from behind the back seat, which is that long. It's wrapped up in terry toweling. She sees him go down the passageway, bang, bang, 2 shots with a 12-gauge shotgun. Jonathan is now deceased. Rod jumps in his car and he takes off. As soon as he leaves, he makes a phone call to his mate and he says, I'm in the shit. That's a technical term for being, I'm in trouble. And he says, I'm going to come over to Cranbourne. I'm going to hide my ute in your garage, which he does. 5 days later, we eventually arrest Rod. And he goes, I don't know where I've been the last 5 days. I can't remember anything other than I can tell you it was an accident. What happened was Cassandra came out and said there was a prowler. I went outside and just near the back door, I picked up a stick. It was wrapped in terry toweling. I walked down the passageway, and as I walked down, the terry toweling fell off the stick. Ron, you won't believe this, but it had a trigger on it, and accidentally it went off. Twice. This is an accident. I think it's a pretty simple case. 12 good people drawn from the community are in the jury. Our case, the Crown case, is this is deliberate. He went to his car and there's a 13-year-old girl who's a witness that sees it. He comes back and shortly after that, Jonathan is shot. Intentionally went out there to kill him or to do real serious injury. Prosecutor, that's how he ran the closing address. And then the defence got up. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you 12 people have been hand-selected. One of you is a bricklayer, one of you is a teacher. I want you to draw on your vast life experience. And I could see, sir, that you went to Sunday school. And when you went to Sunday school, you learnt biblical text. Well, I want you to take a text into the jury room, and the text is beyond reasonable doubt. I can see, madam, you think more likely than not my client is guilty. More likely than not. Well, you must return a verdict of not guilty. I don't want you to go away from here and think about the evidence. It might even be in a moment of tenderness with your loved one. You reflect back on something that was said during the trial, it'll be too late. You'll have convicted my client, who has an impeccable character, to a term of imprisonment that he doesn't deserve. I ask you to go and consider your verdict, but remember the biblical text, beyond reasonable doubt. 2 hours later, not guilty. What I ask is, if you're on a jury, you use your common sense. It's not that difficult. Don't get involved in the theatrics. What do I want you to take away from tonight? Homicide investigation is fascinating. It's about human behaviour. How do we as investigators actually cope? Well, up until recently, we might have got an email which said, if you're struggling, give us a ring. But at times it's about talking about some of those horrific things. It's about doing something outside of policing to actually keep you stable. Life is very fragile. But what I want you to really take away is we've got to slow up a little bit as a community. We've got to start to re-engage. And we now have a Royal Commission into mental health here in Victoria, because we know that mental health right across Australia, other parts of the world, is now a major issue. So we've actually got to think about it, talk about it. If you're struggling, please go and talk to someone about it. Seek help, because it's not that bad. You might say, Ron, you're full of shit. I've been there. we can develop a habit in 60 days. So quite easily, the thing for me to come home after going to a homicide is sit down and have a glass of red wine. 1 glass becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, 3 becomes 4. Then it becomes a habit. And you've got to actually deprogram your brain to get away from that habit. Have I suffered depression? Yes. Have I been on medication? Yes. But I've come through because I've talked about it. I've spoken to professionals about it. So I'm not just standing up here gobbing off about it. I've actually been there. I know what it is. So please, if you're struggling, get help. Thank you.
I think we could tell by the silence in the room that it was a fascinating discussion. So Ron, thank you for your thoughts tonight, your input and your stories that you've told us. In